On behalf of the Jackson County, Michigan Historical Society, I want to welcome you to this evening's program entitled Memories of Jackson County Veterans of the Vietnam War. As many of you know, next month is the 50th anniversary of the official end of the war, although active U.S. Involvement militarily ended before that time. I'm Ken Wyatt, and I'm a board member of the Historical Society, and I'm also a veteran of the Vietnam era, but in the U.S. Army I served in Korea for a couple of the same years that these gentlemen have served. Anyway, as you'll see, as they begin answering some of the questions, they represent a wide variety of experiences in the war, and I think you'll enjoy and probably be sobered somewhat by some of what you hear. Anyway, the next thing on the agenda is for me to read the biographies that have been submitted by each of the gentlemen. And by the way, I think you're supposed to be coming up here. In fact, why don't you come up as I read through the biographies? Is that all right? Okay. This is to introduce each man. First is Navy Radio Man, 2nd Class, John Gibbs. John, would you like to come on up? He joined the Navy in 1966 and served with dedication throughout his military career. After completing training, he was stationed in Guam for a year and a half before deploying to Vietnam from 1969 to 70. In Vietnam, he served with the Inland River Patrol in the Mekong Delta, supporting critical operations in challenging conditions. Following his military service, John returned to Jackson and established a successful career as an electrician. Next is Ray Prier. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Ray was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1967 as a Canadian citizen on a green card, serving until 1969. He completed basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, followed by advanced training at Fort Eustis, Virginia, where he trained as a helicopter crew chief and repairman. Deployed to Vietnam for approximately 6 months, Ray served as a repairman with a unit responsible for flying troops in and out of landing zones. His unit operated 20 Hueys, tragically losing one on their very first mission to enemy gunfire, resulting in the loss of the crew chief and co-pilot. Ray took on the role of night shift crew leader while also performing additional duties as a guard, bunker NCO, and charge of quarters. Next is retired Navy Chief Hospitalman Michael Finch. He served 23 years in the Naval Reserves during the Vietnam War from April 1968 to March 69. He was attached to the 3rd Battalion, 27th Marines, and the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Assigned to an infantry company, Chief Finch provided critical medical care to wounded Marines and coordinated medevac helicopters to transport them to hospitals, achieving a remarkable 98% survival rate for the injured. Following his distinguished military career, he worked for the Michigan Department of Corrections for 21 years. He now serves as president of Vietnam Veterans Chapter 109 in Jackson. Al Cavison is next. He served as supervisor out in my neck of the woods, Concord Township, following a career as founder, president, and CEO of the Great Northern Century Company. A leader in the security investigations field, he's held prominent roles, including chairman of the Executive Committee for Investigations and Security Professionals for Legislative Action, president of the National Council of Investigation and Security Services, and founder of the Michigan Contract Security Association. He enlisted in the U.S. Army in March 1968 as an armor tank crewman. He had a service career with twists and turns, was promoted to Buck Sergeant E5 in November and shipped out to Vietnam in December of 1968. Landed in Tan Son Nhut, shipped immediately to Bert, the 9th ID headquarters, assigned to the 9th ID 3/5th Cavalry. Within a few days, the 9th was sent back to the States, while the 3/5th Cav was assigned OPCON to the 101st Airborne Infantry and shipped north to the DMZ. He never got farther south than the Assaw Valley. The rest of the time he was there. And he de-rossed out in January of 1970. Next is John Snyder, graduated from Grosse Pointe High School in 1961 and earned a BA in chemistry from Eastern Michigan University in 1966, where he also completed ROTC. Hours after graduating, he was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army Engineer Corps. Following training at Fort Belvoir, he was stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington, before deploying to Vietnam with the 20th Engineer Brigade. From July 67 to July 68, he commanded the 547th Engineer Platoon, MAP Depot, overseeing map distribution to units across 3 and 4 corps areas. During the Tet Offensive of 1968, his unit fortified defenses and maintained operations without incident. After returning to the U.S., he served in the Training Division in Flint before resigning his commission in 1972. He went on to work as an analytical chemist for the state of Michigan, retiring in 2002. In retirement, he became an active lifetime member of the American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, and Vietnam Veterans of America. Walt Reed, a Jackson native raised in Clark Lake, graduated from Michigan State University and was commissioned into the U.S. Army through ROTC. He served 2 tours in Vietnam, first with an armored cavalry unit from 1967 to 68, and later as an Army advisor to a Vietnamese infantry regiment from 1972 to 73. During his second tour, he witnessed President Nixon's announcement of the end of U.S. military involvement, but remained on assignment with the 4-party Joint Commission to end the war and restore peace. After his military service, Walt taught ROTC at Eastern Michigan University and later joined Chrysler Defense in 1977, working on the Abrams main battle tank project. After 24 years with Chrysler Defense and General Dynamics, he returned to Clark Lake and visited Vietnam again as a tourist in 2007, fondly recommending it as a family destination. Army Sergeant Gene McGee was drafted into the Army at age 26 and served in Vietnam during the Tet Offensive in 1968. As part of the engineering unit, he led numerous patrols in search of the enemy and also served as a drill instructor during his military career. A dedicated veteran, Gene is a longtime member of various Vietnam veterans chapters and continues to give back to his community by delivering Meals on Wheels to seniors in Jackson. He is often accompanied by his PTSD service dog, a beloved golden doodle cherished by his fellow chapter members. Finally, Army Staff Sergeant David G. Schnurr served from 1966 to 1970, beginning with basic training at Fort Leonard Wood and advanced communications security training at Fort Devens, Massachusetts. He deployed to Vietnam in 1967, serving in the Central Highlands before being stationed in Okinawa from 1968 to 1970. After returning stateside, he served with the 1st Infantry Division at Fort Riley from 1974 to 76 in helicopter maintenance, followed by a deployment to Korea near the DMZ from 1976 to 77. Afterward, he served at Fort Bragg as a unit reenlistment NCO and concluded his career as a helicopter maintenance instructor at Fort Eustis, Virginia from 1979 to 1980. Gentlemen, take your seats, please. And now I would ask our president of the Historical Society to come and take over as moderator. And he's got a pile of questions to ask. Maurice?
Thank you very much, Ken. Well, before I get started, I know everyone just sat down, but I believe Mike is going to lead us with the Pledge of Allegiance today and demonstrate the flag. Well,
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
When we do presentations, and we fold the flag at every presentation, as well as do pledge of allegiance. Each fold has a meaning to it. You all probably know about the stars, the stripes, and the colors, and what they're for. But this, anyway, the red signifies symbol of life. The second, well, that's on the wrong side. Okay. The first fold of our flag is a symbol of life. Second fold is a symbol of our belief in eternal life. Third fold is made in honor and remembrance of the Vietnam veterans departing our ranks who gave a portion of their lives for the defense of our country to attain peace throughout the world. The fourth fold represents our weaker nature. For as American citizens trusting in God, it is in Him we turn in times of peace as well in times of war for His divine guidance. The fifth fold is a tribute to our country. For in the words of Stephen Decatur, our country in dealing with other countries, may she always be right, but it is still our country, right or wrong. The sixth fold is for where our hearts lie. It is with our heart that we pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The seventh fold is a tribute to our armed forces, for it is through the armed forces that we protect our country and our flag against all enemies, whether they be found within or without the boundaries of our republic. The eightfold is a tribute to the one who entered into the valley of the shadow of death, that we might see the light of day. The ninthfold is a tribute to womanhood and mothers, for it has been through their faith, their love, loyalty, and devotion that the character of the men and women who have made this country great as it has been molded. The tenfold is a tribute to the Father, for He too has given His sons and daughters for the defense of our country since they were first born. The 11th fold represents the lower portion of the seal of King David, King Solomon, and glories in the Hebrews' eyes, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The 12th fold represents the emblem of eternity and glorifies in the Christian's eyes God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. The 13th fold, or when the flag is completely folded, the stars are uppermost minded of us, of our nation motto, in God we trust.
Normally at this time, we would present the flag to the family.
Thank you very much. I'm going to sneak through and turn these microphones on. Hopefully we don't have another volume issue. All right, we got through it. And then those all come up. Oh, the holder as well. Well, as Ken mentioned, my name is Marie Simhoff. I have the privilege of serving as the president of the Jackson County, Michigan Historical Society. And tonight is certainly something special. We are doing a panel with Vietnam veterans of Jackson County sharing their experiences. This is something that was done by the former Jackson County Historical Society in the early 2000s, where they did one first with World War II veterans, and then they did a following one several years later with veterans of the Korean War. It was an open format, so I would ask a question. Anyone is welcome to answer it. There's no particular order in which someone has to answer. If you don't want to answer the question, you don't have to answer the question. Other people can answer it as well. But before we dive into our first question of the evening, and the first two are kind of just like raise your hand questions, won't we dive in too much. But does anyone have any questions before we get going with the rest of our program? All right. Does anyone in the audience have any questions before we get going with the rest of our program? All right. Well, thank you very much. Let's dive in. Were any of you on active duty at the time that the war broke out? All right. We'll continue. And then, if I did mention already, the majority of these questions are recycled from the Korean War veteran panel as well.
Say the question again.
Were any of you active duty at the time that the war broke out in Vietnam? Can you share a little bit about your service?
Commissioned in 1962. Actually, the beginning of the war was about that time, but it didn't start being recognized until about 1965. So I entered the service in 1962 and didn't go to Vietnam until 1967. From 65 to 66, the war became a headline in all of our newspapers. So yeah, I was there when it started.
Thank you. Were any of you in the reserve units at the time when the war started? All right. For those of you who were not in the reserve units at the time the war started, were you drafted or were you volunteers?
Volunteer. I volunteer.
Drafted.
Volunteer.
Volunteers?
Semi-volunteer.
I'm drafted. I volunteer.
All right. So let's dive in from there. And feel free, when you talk, to please take the microphone up as well. Let's see. For those of you who volunteered when the war started, what was your thinking at the time and why did you volunteer?
I had grown up in Southeast Asia. My parents were Christian missionaries. They came back to the United States and went to Bible Bible school in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and graduated from there. But being 19 years old and understanding that under the domino theory, if South Vietnam fell to the north under the communists, that Laos would fall, Cambodia would fall, and Thailand eventually would fall, and that was my homeland where I'd grown up. So Asians were my people, and I felt like I was defending especially the Thai country that had never been conquered. It had been occupied during World War II, but it had never considered itself conquered by anybody. So my reasons partly were defending my own homeland, but I was also an American. I went down to the American Embassy when I was 18 and registered for the draft. But by the time 1965 came along, the war was beginning to accelerate, and I enlisted in December of 1965, and by the beginning, I had a year of training between basic training and security communications training in Fort Devens, and then as I arrived at the end of 1966, they sent us home for 2 weeks leave, and I had to report to duty before New Year's to open an Army terminal and be shipped over to Vietnam. I arrived right after the New Year in 1967, and I was there from 67, and I volunteered to stay another 6 months, so I was there 18 months the whole time I was there. I was stationed in the Central Highlands out along the Cambodian border and the Laos border. We were interdicting the North Vietnamese as they were running supplies and trucks south along the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
I was born in Detroit in 1949, and I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and I'm sure that's pretty familiar tune to most of us here. When I was a kid, everybody was a patriot. Everybody was a patriot. You never heard anybody speak ill of America or our military or any of the rest of it. My dad was a union bricklayer. All his buddies, all our relatives were union guys, and every one of them served in either the Second World War or the Korean War, some of them even the First World War. And these guys would get together, and us kids, we couldn't get enough of it. So I think the question was, why did you join and what, okay. We couldn't get enough of it. They frequently would kick us out. We would be hanging around, doorposts, listening to what they were saying. We were learning, first of all, how to be men, but we were learning our parents' patriotism. And the big thing about patriotism back then was everybody that was in this country, almost to a man, had fled Mussolini's Italy, they'd fled Hitler's Germany, they'd fled Romania, Russia, they'd fled totalitarian, dictatorial, Nazi, fascist regimes, and they came here for the liberty and the freedom that America offered. Everybody loved this country. So, as I was going through high school, the operative philosophy amongst all my classmates was, what are you going to do after high school when you graduate? Almost to a man, everybody's over. I'm going into the service. I'm going to do a stint in the Army. I'm going into the Navy. I'm going to be a Coast Guardsman, whatever. Everybody planned on going into the service and doing their part to support our country. If you look at my yearbook, 90% of the comments that are made by people that sign my yearbook involve something to do with being in the service, with serving the country. And the pride that we had in our country, the pride that was instilled to us by our parents, which we really aren't doing much anymore. was palpable, and it was overwhelming. It was everywhere. So I joined the service intending to do my bit to support my country and defend my country. I would learn more about that later, but that was the whole thing right there. And that's the most important thing about gatherings like this, is that our youth find out the truth, that they know that what we have in America today, what our social situation is today, that ain't what it was. That isn't the way it's always been.
Okay, first of all, starting with the pride of serving our country. Back in junior high, I was deciding that I wanted to go into the electrical field through a gentleman that I knew that was an electrician that inspired me. So I was going that course. I was going through high school and realizing that the draft was going to come up someday. And I worked towards thinking about the Navy as being a step in that educational program that would help me to get the knowledge I needed to proceed toward being an electrician. So Vietnam was not in my plans at the moment, but I did see the Navy as an opportunity and a privilege to serve.
Fall of 1961, every freshman at Eastern Michigan University, male, had to serve, take 2 years of ROTC. And kind of being in the ROTC, in the military, I could see the handwriting on the wall. And I decided that I'd rather go in as a second lieutenant rather than a private, because a second lieutenant's maybe one level above a PFC. And also, they also paid, they had a stipend for being 34th. But I saw the writing on the wall, and I knew it was a matter of time until I was going to serve, and I wanted to be one level up as an officer.
Thank you. Does anyone else care to comment on this question before we move on?
Okay, I was taking pre-med classes out here when it was called Jackson Junior College back in the day. And I took a semester off because I was working full-time and going to school full-time, just couldn't do both, so I took time off. And the draft board said, "Come here, son." So I went down to good old beautiful Fort Wayne in Detroit and went through the process. And of course, I was 1A, so got to thinking about it. I said, I don't want to get drafted into the Army and just, be a grunt or something. I would check out these services to see who had the best medical training, and it happened to be the Navy, so I enlisted in the Navy. Fully expecting to be maybe stationed at a hospital or on a hospital ship, something like that. Well, come to find out, I didn't know it at the time, but the Marine Corps does not have their own medical department. So guess where I ended up? The Marines are part of the Navy, so they said, "Son," yep, so I ended up wearing green instead of navy blue. But they gave me great training. The Marines looked out for me, I looked out for them, and I'm sure glad that it turned out that way.
Thank you all. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was born in Detroit in 1941 AD, and I was 26 years old. I didn't think I was going to go into the service, so I just relaxed and bought a house and a couple of cars and this and that. And I got drafted. I was 26, and I went to Fort Leonard Wood, took basic, and I did well IQ-wise, and I ended up being a drill instructor. Drill instructors had an 18-month stabilization, so I knew that I was not going to Vietnam. When I turned around, I was on an airplane going to Vietnam. And I ended up in the highlands in Pleiku for the Tet Offensive 1968. And I don't know if you all know what the Tet Offensive is. It's the Chinese New Year. And it was supposed to be a truce, but they built up. They weren't thinking about truce. And they were just beating us up severely. And I was a combat engineer squad leader. I took a group of armed high school kids out in the jungle. The average age back then was like 18, so I was an old man. And I always told my squad, if we get hit, you be part of the ground. And luckily I came back. Perfect. And humble. Thank you.
Okay, I went to service in 1967. I got my green card, I married an American gal. We'd been married just over a year, just about a year. Anyway, we got married in March of 66. And in October of 66, I got my green card. Moved over here right away. It was my in-laws for a few months. And then it was maybe around April of 1967, I got my letter to go and have a physical. So like a good guy, I went down there and had the physical. Got my 1A status. I'm thinking, oh, 1A, I won't go in for a while. So it turns out in July of 1967, I was working for Uncle Sam. I went to Fort Knox for my basic training for about 8 weeks. And then I got my orders to go to Fort Eustis, Virginia to do my training for a helicopter crew chief. I had no idea about airplanes, none whatsoever, especially a helicopter. Then why are they sending me there? When I signed up for the motor pool, and I also signed up to go to Germany. But I ended up in Vietnam in 1969. I was supposed to go to Vietnam in about June or July of 1968. But we went to Fort Eustis. There was about 13 of us from Eustis went to Fort Lewis. We were supposed to go to Vietnam from there. But something happened. We didn't go. We ended up in a motor pool. Well, some of the guys, they said, hey, I signed up to go to Vietnam. So they looked these orders over and they saw, oh, look at all these crew chiefs. And we're in a motor pool. So they shipped us up to Fort Carson, Colorado, where we did our Vietnam training. We had all brand new equipment. I worked on UH-1Ds, and they were all brand new tools. Everything was all brand spanking new. So we did our training there from September to about January, loaded up our equipment. My wife was living with me. I took her home. I came back, and about 2 weeks later, they wanted volunteers to go to Vietnam early. That was the only time I ever volunteered, was when I said, I'm going anyway, so let's go and get this over with. So I went, but I was in Vietnam just a few months. That's all the time I had left. They wanted me to resign after I was over there. I don't think so. One thing, my wife wasn't crazy about being in the service. I wasn't crazy about being there. Because for one, I was a Canadian. I said, what am I doing here? But I did find out, I gotta say this, once I go, it was in spring of '69. They flew about 300 women to Hawaii, and they became citizens. They swore in as citizens. 300 from Vietnam, they did. I said, oh, that's great. I figured when I get home, I just go to the board, sign these papers, and I'm a citizen. It was 1980 I became a citizen, but it was a piece of cake.
One other reason why I went ROTC is I was able to plan it into my career. As I graduated with my degree in chemistry, I knew I was going to serve 2 years active duty with the Army Corps of Engineers instead of Chemical Corps, of course. Then 2 years active reserve, and then 2 years as a name at St. Louis, and then I finished my obligation to the U.S. Army, and then I could continue on my career with the state of Michigan. So it was kind of planning my military into my total career.
Thank you all. Before we continue, a couple of you spoke about the youth. And I know our room isn't quite filled here today, but one of our main objectives here today, not the main objective, is to provide this recording. So that way the youth and people in schools and generations to come can hear your stories, hear your work. So that's one of the main stories. Even looking back now at the Korean War panel and the World War II veteran panel, of those have already impacted people. So while there might not be thousands of people in this room, I believe we'll have quite a few viewers later as we go forward. Al, you spoke about patriotism, and this next question ties into patriotism. Growing up with World War II veterans and Korean War veterans, did their service and patriotism have any bearing on your thinking or decision process to enlist?
Absolutely. Absolutely, no question. And I think that patriotism had as much of an infectious effect on not just me, but every youth, every teenager, every young person of the day, as the negative stuff that we're seeing in our society has on today's youth. There's no question. I can't imagine, like I mentioned the first go around here, nobody ever spoke ill of the country, nobody ever spoke ill of our president, nobody ever spoke ill of our military. I would imagine they'd probably pounded them into a mud puddle if they did. You know, you just didn't do things like that in those days. People were so proud to be American. They were so proud to be part of this country. They were so proud to have served. It's incredible. You know, and when you look at a society where probably 80% of the adult males have either brothers or fathers or cousins or friends or relatives or neighbors that were killed in one of those conflicts, you have a pretty profound sense of commonality of purpose and a pretty profound sense of patriotism, of love of country. You know, so yes, it had an incredible effect on me. And that would not dissipate until after I got home from Vietnam, which is probably going to be a different question. But at any rate.
I may have been drafted into the service, really didn't want to be there. But after being in for 2 years, I learned a lot. And I encourage kids even today, if you're going to go into the service, what kind of go into something that you're going to really enjoy, what you can do after you get out, and what you want to look for. But it taught me discipline, to have be more confidence in myself. You want to do, like I say, I went into helicopter repairs. We did training for about 5 months, 6 months, and now I gotta go actually work on these, and men are gonna be flying them, and they gotta be safe wherever they go. So we try and do that. We go into schools and do presentations, and we teach patriotism. We teach them the flags that we showed you here tonight. We do that portion of it, and we also do the pledge. But we talk to the kids that war, nobody wants to be in a war, but it's there, and we are citizens, and we go. The idea with being in Vietnam was that the Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese, did not want to be communist. And so we went over there to keep them out of that. But it's just the way it ended up, not the way we wanted, but they got it anyway. So we weren't happy with the outcome.
In one of those contacts we had at one of the schools, we recently had a young lady come up to me and she told me about her family, how her great-grandfather and her grandfather and her father all served our country, and she too was going to follow in serving our country. And so, yes, there still are a lot of great people, young people out there.
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't come from a military family. I was growing up in Asia, but early around 1961, 62. We had come back to the States. My parents were on a one-year sabbatical, and when we returned to Thailand, the Americans were already starting to do some probing and listening. They wanted to know what was going on in Southeast Asia. I'd go out to a soccer field and I'd see somebody set up out there. They were Americans. Wow. I get to go over there and talk to these guys. They've got antennas all strung up. And I asked them, well, what do they do? Go, we're weather people. Well, I didn't understand all that, but later on I understood that they were doing a whole lot more than checking out the weather. Later on, a whole company of infantry soldiers came on a sort of training mission, but also probing, checking out the terrain in the area, just getting used to it. They were pitched in pup tents, and it was raining, it was wet, but they were Americans. They were my countrymen, even though I still consider myself half Asian. I eat rice and fish. But during this time, I saw these guys and I said, one day I'm going to be an American soldier. But then you come to, we talk about culture shock, and sometimes we don't really understand culture shock. I had multiple culture shocks because growing up in an Asian society, growing up white in a brown society, being minority, and coming back to the United States, that's a culture shock. The way you do things here, I was homeschooled, so I didn't go to public school. And then during the 1960s, you had this rebellious area of the free love. Everybody's doing everything against the norms of society. Everything's in a state of flux. I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it because I was pretty much focused that one day I would still be an American soldier. I was pretty determined about that. Just because of exposure to these guys that had come out of 25th Infantry Division in Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. But it took a little time. My dad wanted me to spiritually get myself grounded, and I followed his advice. But arriving back here, I saw all of this change that was going on, and in a lot of ways, this was disrupting the norms that people had grown up with, and the things that people had known as family values and American values and things. So it became a very challenging time for me to think about, but I was proud to go, not only be an American soldier, but to go back and think about defending Asia at the time.
Thank you.
I was going to say, in the fall of 1961, I was being ROTC. We were in charge of crowd control at the registration in the Fire Field House at Eastern Michigan University. And there was a lot of hubbub when the word came through that Ken had been shot. And the hubbub went to a very minimum. And that had a very profound effect on me. And that's why one of the reasons I think I was able to very easily sign up for ROTC and become an officer in the U.S. Army.
Thank you. To those of you who were drafted, do you remember what your frame of mind was when you got the draft notice? What was your thinking? I know, John, you had mentioned you were drafted, I believe.
I think it was an expected time because we knew the draft was there. I know at the time I lived up in Lansing, I was 12th on the list in Lansing. And so I knew that at the time was going to come, Uncle Sam was going to say either you'll go mandatory-wise or you can volunteer and kind of go the route you want to go. So it was expected, but not feared.
my frame of mind, am I allowed to say, oh shit? And I had a brother-in-law that had just gotten out of the Army, and he said, oh, you're not going to go to Vietnam. You're not even going to go into the Army. You're too old. Well, I was 26, and I went in the Army. And then he said, well, you're not going to go to Vietnam. So I thought, well, that's good, because I got an 18-month stabilization because I was a drill instructor. Then I was talking to my brother-in-law after I got orders for Vietnam. He said, well, you're not going to get killed. I thought, holy shit, I've been wrong 3 times so far. So my state of mind was pretty grim. And there was a guy in my basic unit. He was from Battle Creek. He was 31 years old and had 2 kids, and he got drafted. And then there was a guy in my engineer unit in Vietnam that had a steel plate in his head. Another guy had a steel pin in his knee. I mean, if you were breathing, you were going to get drafted.
Thank you. Now going forward to basic training. And before we dive into basic training, I want to give a note that we do have a hard cutoff at 7:30 tonight, so we have about a little over a half hour, but we do have quite a few questions to cover. Can any of you share good stories about basic training?
Good stories.
I can't.
Yes.
I know, looking at me, you wouldn't think so, but I scored high in IQ. So I became, in basic training, I became what was called a battalion AI. We had a blue thing with sergeant stripes on it, and we helped the drill instructors. So we didn't have to do KP, we didn't have to do guard duty, I didn't have to crawl the infiltration course. So that's my good story.
I took my training at Fort Knox. I can still remember the company, C-10-5. One of the things when we first got there, we had to run 6 o'clock in the morning before breakfast. When we started out, we walked for a little bit. He said, okay, now we're going to run. So we'd run, then we'd walk. We did that for months. About a week, the next thing you know, we were running full miles the following week. We had this one hill we called misery and agony. You go down and you go up. It was misery and agony, and it was.
I went to basic in Fort Knox too, and the most important things that I took away, I mean, I was your average everyday garden variety pump when I lived in Detroit. I mean, I know you now see me as pure as the driven snow, but I wasn't always that way. It was the discipline, it was the regimentation, it was the structure, it was the command authority. I mean, like, they basically broke me up into little pieces, mixed in a bunch of glue and glued me back together the way they wanted me to. And I remember that misery and agony, and frequently you would encounter them on 27 or 29-mile marches with full packs. And it was Kentucky. So it would generally be in the vicinity of 85, 90, 95 degrees. And let me tell you, what they did more than anything else when we were in the service was they deconstructed you from whatever it was you were when you went into the service and reconstructed you into what they needed you to be an effective fighting piece for the United States Army. My basic training was a really, really good experience for me, in spite of the fact that I hated every minute of it.
I'd like to echo that. As far as what happens in basic training, I don't know about any particular great moments, but the discipline and the challenge to do things that you thought you never could ever do. And I went to Fort Leonard Wood in the spring of 1966. It was cold, it was wet. Live fire exercises where you had to crawl through on your building. It was raining that night. We went to a night exercise. We had explosives going all around us. We were warned, do not stand up because those tracer bullets you see flying over your head at about 3.5 feet elevation will cut you in half because they are live rounds. And as we crawled through the barbed wire and the mud and everything, you wondered whether you were going to make it, because there were a few guys when they'd have to close the range down, stop everything, because somebody did panic and decide they were going to stand up. And but the discipline that you learned carries me today. I had to make my bed. I don't make it so tight that you can bounce the mortar off of it anymore, but every morning when I get up, I still make my bed.
My basic training story is a little different. I commanded a basic training company in 1966. And my story is about one of McNamara's 100,000. For those of you who don't remember, Secretary of Defense decided that he would lower the enlistment standards and we would take 100,000 soldiers that normally could not pass, and we would bring them into the service. One of my young soldiers was his name was Jimmy Olsen. I know that because it was Superboy's pal, Jimmy Olsen, for those of you who are Superboy fans. Jimmy, at the end of his 8-week cycle, I processed him for discharge. The discharge is simply unfit for military service. He doesn't lose any of his privileges. And as I processed him, I received a call. His mother wanted to talk to me. He lived 1 mile off Fort Lewis, where I commanded. That Saturday, she came in and she said, "I understand you are trying to discharge my son." "Yes, ma'am." "You're not going to do that." "Okay. We're going to keep him in the service for 181 days. At that point in time, you will discharge him. He will be eligible for veteran benefits. He will go to work where I work, VA hospital, and he will become a ward orderly, and that's what we have planned for his life." She was successful, by the way. I always wondered if Jimmy made it.
A quick side, my brother-in-law had many disabilities. He was one of the 100,000 McNamara guys. He was a fireman in Germany. Now back to my training, I have to digress a bit. In my chemistry class in 1961, I don't know why, but the prof had us distilling nitric acid and toluene, making dinitrotoluene. He said, "Please don't let your still pops, your flask go to dryness, because there's going to be some residual trinitrotoluene in there." And one of the guys did. You should have seen the records around our lab when that TNT went off. And back in the training, I walk in, the guy takes his block of TNT, goes bam on the side. I almost felt my britches, because I remember what happened in 1961. And the other thing that really impressed me was we were, again, the engineer officer basic course was a whole lot different than for the enlisted men. And one of the things we had to do was to make trenches, anti-tank trenches. It took ammonium nitrate. Anyway, they had us in this bunker, and they set it off, and it was beautiful. It just went up like this. The thing was, it rained mud for about 5 minutes. I couldn't believe the effectiveness of that ammonium nitrate as an explosive. So that made an impression on me. Unfortunately, so did McGay, or whatever his name is, in Oklahoma City.
Thank you. Our next question is, was there any point, either in basic training or at some point after that, when you suddenly developed a realization that your life was different, that you were in a big war, you're not in a big war?
Probably the first time I got hit. And that would have been shrapnel hit me in my occipital bone and went down behind my eye, temporarily blinding me for about 4 days. And they shipped me to the hospital ship, the USS Sanctuary. When I regained my sight, there on that boat, and they didn't send, bruises and scratches and broken arms and things. They sent the serious cases out there. And that was an epiphany. That was a stellar moment for me.
Thank you for sharing. Does anyone else like to? Yes.
I used to take, like I said, a group of high school kids out in the jungle on patrol. And the first time I went up to the duty roster, and it said, Sergeant McGee, night patrol. Well, I went to my platoon sergeant, and I said, who's the comedian? I said, it's scary enough being out there daytime, and you want me to go out at night? And he said, no, that's for real, you're going out. So that was a poop your pants affair there. I was terrified.
I was stationed out of Dak To for a while on the Cambodian border along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And there was a lot of activity there. There was a mountain ridge that we didn't control, that we should have controlled, but they would shoot rockets down on us from there. And when those rockets fell, we had one fall within, from here to the wall from me, dug a hole big enough to park a pickup truck in, and I didn't get a scratch. They threw dirt and shrapnel everywhere. And we were looking at this time for how to find the enemy. We were using airplanes with radio direction finding and so forth. And along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, when they took our intelligence information and gave it to the operational planners, one day they brought in a flight of about 5 B-52s, and they started an orbit. And as they went around this racetrack, number one started on a straightaway, and he would drop these bombs, and you see maybe some pictures of the bombs dropping out of a B-52. As that number one got down to the end, number two was here, and for 25 minutes, these 5 rotated, and bombs would fall to try to interrupt that Ho Chi Minh Trail, because they did move trucks, they moved stuff with bicycles, they moved stuff, and they looked to just destroy that road. But for 25 minutes, fire, brimstone, just earthquakes. I was probably 2.5 miles from the impact zone, and you cannot ever imagine the firepower that can, and hell that can fall from the sky. Just unbelievable.
Thank you for sharing. And that ties into our next question. We just talked about it a little bit there. Can any of you relate stories? What was that? Can any of you relate stories from your personal experiences of being involved in a combat situation?
Yeah. How many do you want to hear?
Just one, we got time.
Just one, we don't have but half an hour. Yeah, in January 7th, 1968, I took command of an armored cavalry unit. We were armored. We had tanks and we had armored vehicles. I took command because the previous troop commander was killed. That action was an infantry battalion of about 1,500 and a cavalry troop of about 200 engaging with 3,000 North Vietnamese. It's a bad fight. We call them gunfights. Shortly thereafter, in fact, 6 days later, I tangled with that NVA regiment again. Cost me 2 tanks. Luckily, it didn't cost me any people. But yeah, I saw what a few conflicts.
One of my most memorable things is when we were deployed out to the jungle, the helicopters would come in and they would hover, and we would throw our packs and then jump. And we had no idea how far off the ground we were. We could be 10 feet, 12 feet, and because of the elephant grass, you couldn't tell how far off the ground we were. And if we came into a hot LZ, which is mean they were taking fire, that helicopter would hover for just seconds and you were done. And you would hit the ground running.
All right, are there any others that will continue to the next question?
I got, okay. And my real memorable battlefield experience, we were on Operation Allenbrook, May 17th of 1968. We encountered a NVA division and 2 VC training battalions, and we just had 1 company, and we got caught in a horseshoe ambush. And that day I lost 22 dead, 78 wounded, some of them from E-casualties. And it took 2 companies to come in from behind in different directions to rescue us. And our machine gunner, he was able to lay down machine gun fire so I could treat my wounded. And eventually he popped his head up once too often and he died. And eventually he was awarded he received the Medal of Honor posthumously. His name was Robert Bert. Saved my life.
We were out in night positions. Mortars come in, they shoot mortars at us, and I had a mortar land about 8 feet from me during the night. Fortunately, there was a metal edge there that protected me, but we had to medevac 3 of our 7-man crew off the boat and scramble and man the guns and defend ourselves. But kind of hectic.
Thank you all for sharing.
One other thing.
Oh, yeah.
On the flip side of that, I never fired my weapon in anger in Vietnam. I never had the chance to. So these guys, you know, they've been through hell. I was damn lucky.
Can I comment on that when you said you did not fire in anger? The military is regimented. You wait for the commands. You don't just fire at will or get mad and shoot people up. And when that did happen, such as My Lai and so forth, people were held accountable for their misconduct. So there is an orderly way to respond to the military.
Thank you, John. A change of tone here. Did any of you have any brushes with celebrities, either military or perhaps civilian, such as USO entertainers like Bob Hope or Anne Margaret, or other well-known figures from the Vietnam War era?
Well, I was selected to go to the Bob Hope show in Da Nang in 1968, and our battalion, they could, send so many people. They would, come send a transport plane to flash to Da Nang for it. So they told us to be on the tarmac at such time. So we sat there, and we sat there, and we sat there. And evidently they weren't coming. Well, we found out later that the aircraft that they sent to pick us up took some ground fire and had to return for repairs. So I guess I was lucky in that way, but I sure would have liked to come and see the show.
I never did get to see any celebrities, but the same event that he's talking about, our units were out in the field. We didn't have a rear aerial. And they sent word out that we could take, out of our platoon, we could take 1 person off each track and load them on a personnel carrier, and they would truck all these people to the Bob Hope show. And this was Christmas, 1968. Okay, so they loaded, we went through and drew lots, and whoever wanted to go, we loaded, I think it was 9 guys on this personnel carrier. They took off and started going down 201, hit a mile, killed everybody on the personnel carrier.
Thank you.
No one else. In July '67, Bob Hope was at Longbin, and they had a nice place for him to be. And I sent all my men to watch the show. So somebody had to stay back to man, so I stayed back. and watched on TV, but my guys got to be able to see Bob Hope. It was really great.
Very good. Were any of you aware of anti-war protests back in the U.S. during your time in Vietnam, and how did it affect you?
I think we all were. You know, especially after the end of 1968 going into 1969. I think we all were, because 69 was Woodstock. That was the whole peace, love, you know, drugs, tune in, whatever the hell they did, I don't know. But at any rate, yeah, and I think a lot of people wrote to us telling us of things that were going on back there. A lot of families that cared about us, and friends that, you know, friends, other people that just were looking for something to put in their letters. To a man, we really resented it. We were, that was absolutely infuriating to think we're over there slogging through the mud and the heat and being eaten by mosquitoes the size of B-52 bombers. You know, and you don't get a hot meal for months at a time. You know, you don't get a shower for months at a time. It's the misery and the privation and the nastiness that you suffer, and then to find out that you've got these people that you went to school with and that you worked with and that you grew up with protesting what you were doing over there, like we had a choice. Now that was absolutely infuriating.
I taught Army ROTC at Eastern Michigan University from 1968 till 1972. We could wear our uniforms on campus at Eastern Michigan. University of Michigan ROTC instructors dared not wear their uniform on campus. They all came in civilian clothes and changed into their uniforms in the locker room. Knew there was a protest going on, didn't know I was going to be thrown right into the middle. Eastern was the right school to be in. like Eastern.
When I came back from Vietnam, I flew into Fort Lewis, and I was looking at the schedules, and I was standing and I was in my greens. A guy came up behind me, took me by the shoulders, said, "Out of my way, baby killer." And at that time, I was just flabbergasted. And then at Metropolitan Airport, a couple of hippies walked by, spit on me and called me baby killer. And I said, at that point, I didn't know what to say. But if that were to happen to me today, someone's going to have a fight. They might kick my butt, but they're going to earn it.
The area we were in, we were pretty isolated from the news and communications, so we didn't really know what was going on back in the States.
What got me most of all with this protesting and everything going on, a lot of the men were hightailing it over to Canada, which is called draft dodgers. And when I learned about a year ago, there was about 40,000 Canadians that came over to the United States and volunteered to go to Vietnam. And they were on their way over to Canada. And then they were starting to let the draft dodgers come back home. And no, I didn't go. I really didn't care for that.
And I was at base camp, so we saw TV fairly, you know, what's going on. And when I saw Jane Fonda making happy with Ho Chi Minh, if she had walked in this door today, I'd swear at her.
So it did have help.
Thank
This
you.
is the problem that the protest movement affected everybody. It didn't matter what your rank was, it affected everybody that served. And as the war was drawing to a close and Nixon was bound and determined to end the war, so the Paris Peace Accords were going on, and you see all of this stuff going on where the protests are getting louder and louder and louder,
and you realize that we had over 550 prisoners of war in Hanoi. We had others that were in bamboo cages in the jungle somewhere. Some of the guys never did make it into North Vietnam as a prisoner. They were prisoners in bamboo cages in either Cambodia or Laos. And here, it's like this country doesn't deserve the sacrifice that was given. We lost 58,479 in this war. And when they decided to end it and walk away and call it peace with honor, from the chief of staff of the Department of Defense, the 4-star generals all the way to privates, everybody was just devastated that our own government would do this.
Thank you all. But I want to comment too, as with myself, being a recent graduate not too long ago of high school and now in college, I think my generation as students, we've really only heard the protester side of the stories through school and media. And here I said, hearing it directly from you guys, your response to how you view the protests and the different experiences, I think that is something I've really never even heard myself. Yes.
On a brighter note, when I was in Pleiku, Vietnam, in our unit, there was a young buck sergeant. His given name was Major. And when he would call over to headquarters, and this is Sergeant Major Jones, I need a Jeep. We can get whatever we want. Any of us that are military, we know that Sergeant Major, he's the top dog. And that's a true story.
One comment, I was teaching chemistry here in college, nurses and everything, and someone was saying that their boyfriends are coming back from Afghanistan or worse, and I told them, you treat them with respect and kindness because they've done good service. Because I was remembering what happened to us.
But off point, but I gotta make this. My business, when I owned my business, I deliberately recruited specifically from the ranks of returning military, and we managed to achieve 92% former military in our, and I was really, really proud of that. And I had a security director who was a retired National Guard Light Colonel. And his name was Rick Glasgow. He's a Jackson native. You'll find him around here somewhere. But at any rate, we used to interview all the new candidates coming in. And he would take the second interview and I would take the final interview. And one day we were interviewing this young man that had just gotten back from Iraq. And we were asking him, about his experiences over there, because we're all servicemen, we're all brothers. And Rick asked me, he says, was there anything particularly noteworthy, that you noticed when you came back, And he says, yeah, as a matter of fact, there was. He says, when we flew in to wherever it was, whatever airport it was, he says, we got off the plane. He says, and there was this great big gaggle of guys, waving flags, and there was confetti, and they were cheering, had American flags and stuff like this, and they were welcoming us home and giving us beers and stuff like that. And he says, we were really surprised, so I asked him, what are you doing? Who are you guys? He said, they were all the old Vietnam vets come to make sure that they didn't get the same welcome that we did.
Exactly. Thank you. We have 2 more questions, and just over around 15 minutes to go, just under 15 minutes. Looking back, how did your experiences during the war shape your life afterward? Were you able to leave them behind, or did they continue to influence you, especially in moments of intense danger?
It influenced me enough that I went back to Vietnam in 2007 wife and kids, and several of the guys that were with me in my camp troop. One of our experiences tells the great story of Vietnam right now. We were on a bus and we went to the base camp that we used while we were over there. It turns out that it is now a Vietnamese army camp. And we drove up to the gate, and a young Vietnamese soldier there with, by the way, an AK-47, nervous as a cat with a new litter, kept saying, "Get away from here, go away." And finally our interpreter said to him, "We want to know if there was an American unit here before you guys came." And the quote from this young man is getting on today. I'm 21. I've been in the Army 2 years. I've got 1 more year to go. I have no idea what was here before I got in the Army. Vietnam is a great place to visit. It's beautiful, white sugar sand. Their second language now is English. When we were there, it was French. They love Americans. They don't harbor any ill will. It'd be an interesting trip. Oh, by the way, it's 14 hours by air.
You can learn, I tell kids, you can learn some discipline while you're in the service if you didn't have it before you went in. I found out after I got out that I could do all kinds of stuff that I never thought I'd be able to do. All I had to do was go look at something and say, yeah, what this was put together to work, now how can I fix it? And I would look at this thing and just say, okay. And I would fix things. And just because I was a mechanic before I went into the service and I learned how to repair a helicopter, what's this little thing I can do that? I have seen ceiling fans. You've seen them and you go up there and you start wobbling around. There's only one blade that's out of balance. I was able to fix a few of those just by looking in there. Wow, look at it. So you learn discipline. And that's what I try and tell even my kids. My oldest son's been 28 years in the service. He retired 2 years ago. But he decided he wanted to be an MP. But he learned real discipline while he was in there. He came out, and we couldn't believe this was our son. Even my wife said, "Hey, what did you do with my son? This isn't him." So you learn a lot of stuff, and I mean, it was good.
I had always had an intense interest in aviation. I had a private pilot's license before I joined the Army. I was also a ham radio operator and knew Morse code, and this was kind of why when they were building up intelligence units, they threw me into an intelligence unit. But when I got out of the service, I stayed in aviation. I worked for a company, Air Transport International, and they had a lot of military contracts. So we flew to a lot of places around the world. I was like a crew chief on a 4-engine heavy transport hauling supplies to military bases. I'd ride up in the front with the cockpit with the rest of the crew. And then when the thing hit the ground, of course, anything that was wrong was my job. But this discipline that I learned in the service and the learning helicopters in addition to other aspects of aviation gave me a 35-year career in aviation maintenance. I got to work on a lot of different airplanes. Some of them are kind of obsolete and gone by the wayside and become Coca-Cola and beer cans by now. But it was a very interesting time for me to be able to travel. At the same time, it was my time and their nickel to transport me around, because since I was an airframe and licensed FAA and aircraft and power plant mechanic, they needed my signature for anything in the logbook anywhere in the world. We went to places like Kwajalein, in the Marshall Islands, you don't go there if you don't belong there. Ascension Island in the South Atlantic, you don't go there if you don't belong there. Diego Garcia, you hear quite a bit about it, but you don't go there if you don't belong there. So, Thule, Greenland, you don't go there if you don't belong there. But I got to go to a lot of places, 66 countries and islands around the world during my civilian career.
To briefly answer that question, when you get to Vietnam, most of us got what we call a short timer's calendar. You hang it on your locker or whatever, and you start Xing off the days. And when you get down to about a week or two, you are considered a short timer. And if you go over to Withington Park and look at that memorial, the name Paul Potter took my place. I was doing road recon. And my orders came through a week early, and my first sergeant said, if you can get ready in 15 minutes, you can go on a medevac chopper and get out of here. Well, I was ready in 3 minutes. And anyway, when I got back, I was feeling guilty because I abandoned my squad. And then when I found out Paul Potter got killed doing my job, it hit me hard. And I turned to drugs and alcohol. And I about killed myself with drugs and alcohol. I was under psychiatric care for about a year. And my psychiatrist told me that the guilt, it builds an inner wall. I forgot what they call it, the wall within, I think. And luckily, I had one of the best psychiatrists there is. And again, I turned out perfect and humble.
Thank you for sharing. John, you had
A common term we hear is PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, which can linger over the years. When I first came back from Vietnam, it was a 21-hour flight to California, then get on another plane, come over to Great Lakes north of Chicago. We were walking down the street there, and you know how when the rails on the train from interurban will hit the joints, it kind of clatters. There were two of us walking down the sidewalk, and all of a sudden, we were laying on the sidewalk, looking at each other saying, no, this is not happening, we're okay. About 8 or 9 years ago, I was driving down I-94 at night on the 4th of July. As I was driving through the dark all by myself down the highway, July 4th, somebody set off a bunch of fireworks right along the highway. So I don't remember anything that happened for the next 10 miles on the highway. So sometimes, even though you deal with it and you're not really diagnosed with having it, it still can come back and affect you from time to time.
That's what Waldo's for.
Right, for holding. It's not a good thing to anybody that's been in a combat zone. Don't sneak up on them, tap them on the shoulder, let them know that you're there. I had my son come, I was working in the basement one night, and he come down, and he kind of said, hey, Dad, real loud. And I had my back working on my bench, and he did that, and I had those goosebumps. It's a loud noise that gets us if we don't know it's there. I can watch a fireworks go off. Don't throw the fireworks behind me or any better, because you will make him jump. And if they're loud enough, he will hit the ground. When I was at the air base to come home from Vietnam, they put us under this tin roof. We're waiting to get on the plane to come home. There's a bunch of us under a tin roof. And the jet goes flying over the top of this thing. You must see a bunch of men scattered. We were under chairs and whatever. We were on the ground. Don't scare a veteran, please.
The sounds of war never leave you. And the things that we've talked about this evening run through our heads constantly. That's why we can safely relate some of them, but there's far more that run through our heads all the time. And this is anytime your computer brain is impacted by a trauma situation, and it could be you're first on the scene of an accident or something. These things get embedded in your computer brain and they don't leave for a very long time. That when it comes to the 4th of July celebrations and we sing the national anthem, the bombs bursting in midair, and everybody sees the glorious and beautiful, and everybody's oohing and ahhing about the wonderful fireworks. But you don't understand that they were representative of what was happening at when Francis Scott Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner at Fort McHenry, and the fact that when he said, by the dawn's early light, he looked out and the flag was still there. It was being held up by the bodies of others that had lost their lives defending the flag.
Thank you. There's a guy from last.
When I got back from Vietnam, I got back July 1st, and there was no debriefing or anything. In the war zone, hop on a plane, I don't know, in California, maybe one in Michigan. My wife and my daughter wanted to go see the fireworks on the 4th of July, and that didn't go well at all. And I only got occasionally rounded by Charlie. I had no experience like these guys had. We were at a family thing. I don't remember what it was, Doc. We were there, but anyway, American Post 29 has a cannon, and we didn't know it was there. And when they set it off, it all jumped.
About 8 of us took the. Yeah, this was at the Bailey Fest.
Bailey Fest, yeah.
Yeah, no warning, and they fired it off. And we did a funeral one time out near Tonkin, and somebody lit up some tannerite, big explosion with no warning, and we just wanted to beat the tar out of them because it scared the little crap out of us. But these sudden loud noises, unexpected, will send us right back. I had survivor's guilt. My biggest problem. When I left Vietnam, we had a plane load of Marines, and I was the only corpsman on board. We were on just normal chit chat before we took off. So when they warmed it up and they got on the flight path to take off, then the guys started to get real quiet. And as soon as they took off, the wheels off the ground, a big shout out. And that's silence. Survivor's guilt.
Thank you for sharing. For the sake of history, we're going to go another 10 minutes, if that's okay, for the last 2 questions. First of which is, do any of you have any wisdom or reflections you would like to share for the historical record?
I have so much wisdom I would like to share. Now, it's a point that needs to be made. If it's made only for the people in this room, well, that's good by me. Everybody's seen all of the war movies that have come out about the Vietnam War, The Deer Hunter, and I don't even remember all the names. I've seen them all, and every one of them are acceptable excuses for whatever. And I got to tell you, a lot of Hollywood seems to be fixated on this idea that we're some kind of gruesome, malevolent animals. That, we raped and robbed and pillaged and burned and slaughtered our way through Vietnam with absolutely no controls and no discipline, no nothing. I mean, it was just every man for himself, and, devil may care, take whatever you want, do whatever you want. And I got to tell you flat out, that's bullshit. Pure and simple bullshit. I've seen movies where they depict platoons, squads, raping Vietnamese women. Nothing infuriates me more than to see things like that. The group I served with, the 3rd and the 5th Cav, the 9th Infantry Division, we had something that Hollywood does not understand. So they can't adequately portray, and that is honor. And I can't imagine, in my heart of hearts, I can't imagine standing idly by and watching anyone rape a woman. I don't care if she's NBA, VC, or an innocent civilian. I can't imagine that happening. Now, thank God, I was never presented with that. I never had to witness that. And there's a reason for that, because it didn't happen. And that's critically important. And if you take nothing away from this historical thing, take that with you. What they say we were, we are not. And we never have been. There is not one person I have ever served with who would stand idly by and watch anything like that occur without stepping in and taking whatever action was necessary by whatever means was necessary to bring it to a stop. This would not happen. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go down to John real quick. And then go.
Of all the Vietnam movies that I've seen, the most realistic was Go Tell the Spartans with Bert Lancaster. And the ending is real.
Wisdom for you folks. Don't let our country get into a war that they don't want to win. Why do I say that? I actually heard President Nixon, when he got reelected, say that our goal was never to win this war. Our goal was to stabilize it so the Vietnamese could win. We have a bad habit of getting into wars that we have no intention of winning. So the wisdom is take that out with you. Don't let our country get into wars we can't win.
The war Powell, Afghanistan. Powell, I think he told Bush, you tell me what you want done, but don't tell me how to do it. Because a pilot told me in 1968, he was on the runway in Benoit, getting set to take off. The White House called him back. They wanted to change his munitions. The White House. No wonder he lost the war. That's right.
Our chapter motto is never again will one generation of veterans abandon another. And that I'd like to leave you with this evening, that we value our camaraderie regardless of our service, our rank, or anything else. The fact that we have served our country honorably. We have little inter-service rivalries, Marines against whoever. It's kind of always been that way. The Navy would put into Hong Kong, and the Marines would get off, and the Navy and the Marines are going to have a fight. Yeah. But there's always been inter-service rivalries, and we do in our own chapter. But when push comes to shove, we're together.
Thank you. We have time for just 4 minutes, so does anyone in the audience have a question for our panel? Yes.
I'm wondering if any of you veterans have been to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., and what were your thoughts about it?
It took me, I don't know how many years
Well done.
before I could actually go. I have two brethren that are on that wall. Paul Potter is one of them.
It's incredibly profound. Incredibly profound.
I was able to go on, I was living in Wisconsin at the time, and I got to go on Badger Honor flight out of Madison, Wisconsin. Had to be up there early in the morning, and my sister was my sponsor to go along with me. Her husband had just passed away a little while before, and we flew into Washington, D.C. We had a wonderful reception there. We had the tour of all of the different places. Yeah, something was going on at the Marine Memorial, and we couldn't go at that time, but we saw everything else. And we were able to go to the wall and to see all those names look at the wall and know the history of the wall, the artist that designed it, and see the things that get left there, the vets that come there and reflect on people that they know, that their names, they're just names on a wall now. But it's a sacred place. And we as Americans have to let other Americans know that there are sacred places. We talk about monuments in this country, and somebody decided in this country that they were going to destroy history. And we were going to take down the Confederate monuments as part of our American history. This whole idea of changing everything that is American. North, south, east, west, it doesn't matter. We have a history that needs to be preserved and told to the next generation so that they can follow in our footsteps and love this country and our flag.
Usually when you refer to the cost of war, you're talking millions and billions of dollars. But one of the costs of war that we have is the lives. And I think the latest number that I've heard for Jackson County is 51 young people from Jackson County gave their lives in Vietnam, 50 service to our country.
Also, there's 4 of us up here on this panel that we went to Washington, D.C. with a high school group from Michigan Center High School. They made arrangements for us to see all the memorials, all the military memorials out in D.C. And the 4 of us actually got to lay a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown. What an experience that was. I've done it twice now. But we all were very profoundly affected by that.
There's 11 names on that wall, and I wonder if I could have done something different, they would still be with us. I've been there several times.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for taking part in our panel discussion here tonight. But more than anything, I'd like to thank you for your service to our country. So if everyone in the room could stand and give a rising applause to our panelists.